If there is to be peace in the world, the nations, the cities, there must be peace in between neighbors, in the home, and in the heart. Our smallest spheres of our lives parallel the largest spheres of our society. While the events in DC this week may seem far from our living rooms here in Chicago, the underlying human responses of rage and despair, action and paralysis, of fawning over a tyrant, happen in the same way, whether that's in our home, our nation, or our congregation. Whether we face a small conflict with a loved one in our home, or a dispute with a neighbor, or an argument with a church member, or conflict between the riotous mob in DC and our democracy, we humans respond predictably to threat. That magnitude may range a lot, from a hurtful comment made carelessly to an armed insurrection made purposefully. Most of us have heard of the two common responses to threat: fight or flight. Those are the responses we also saw in our children's story this morning. The rabbit listened. Sometimes when we perceive a threat, we respond by fighting. But this isn't necessarily a fist fight. It can look different. We might be angry and yell. Or we might want to do something right away. That often looks like trying to fix something. Maybe we make a new policy. We buy something. We set up an order. We go get something done. We might talk. We might lash out at others. Sometimes when we feel threatened, in small ways, medium ways, or big ways, we might respond by flight. But flight isn't necessarily running away from a tiger. Instead, we might make a joke to deflect and distract. It's running away from what's happening. We may deny that anything happened. That's also flight. We may minimize it, so it's small enough that it doesn't seem like something we should flee from. We may hide physically by leaving, or in more clever ways. Yet we also respond to perceived threats, large or small, in two other ways. We may freeze. This happens in the animal kingdom just as it does to us humans. It's when we find ourselves sitting in shock and bewilderment, unable to move. It happened to me on Wednesday as I sat in this office chair, slack-jawed, watching the riotous mob take over the Capitol in real time. The fourth way humans respond to threat is to fawn. This happens when we defend someone who has hurt others. We lavish them with attention or praise. We defend them. We ingratiate ourselves to that perpetrator. It's a way of keeping ourselves safe and somewhat sane. This is what Trump's followers and a few remaining politicians have been doing in response to the threats they feel. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Only when we have names for our reactions can we begin to identify them. And once we can identify them, we can begin, bit by bit, to make changes. When we make changes in our hearts, then we change our homes, our neighborhoods, maybe even our congregation, our cities, our nations, and the world. Like many congregations and any group of human beings, really, we have a history of conflict. But not only conflict, also some destructive behavior. How does it feel to hear that? It's pretty natural to feel defensive. That's flight. Maybe your instinct is to deny or minimize that. That's also flight. You just feel angry that I said that. That's fight. Maybe you're just silent. That's freeze. Threat isn't always armed insurrectionists. It can be small, perceived, and subjective. Think about this scenario. In coffee hour, someone makes a disparaging remark about another member. Here are the responses you might have seen. Some people remain silent. They're frozen. Someone shouts back an angry remark. That's fight. Someone else makes a joke. That's another form of flight. Someone else defends the person who made the comment. She's been a loyal member for 20 years and has always been nice to me. She didn't mean that. That's fawning. In 1648, the Cambridge Platform was the first document among our country's colonial settlers to create a covenant about church governance. Our UU churches, polity governance are descended from this document. And these are the words from our forebears in 1648. The more we discern the unkind, the unbrotherly, and unchristian contention of our godly brethren and countrymen in the matters of church government, the more earnestly do we desire to see them joined together in one common faith, and ourselves with them. So rest assured, we have been in good company for at least the last 373 years, if not all of human history. And just like our Puritan forebears, about a year and a half ago, our Board of Trustees commissioned church leaders to form a Good Relations Committee, or GRC for short. The GRC has worked tirelessly, meeting twice a month, and working in between those meetings since August of 2019 and straight through the pandemic. They've reviewed concerns from members, conferred with denominational expertise, developed a comprehensive policy for conflict resolution that was adopted by our Board of Trustees and is part of our policy manual. They took training in conflict mediation and now have developed a process writing their own curricula for us to make a behavioral covenant. A behavioral covenant is a statement of shared promises of what we will do and what we will not do in our community. We have a theological covenant already. That's what we recite every Sunday, and we did earlier. Love is the spirit of this church. It's a statement of shared aspiration of our belief about how we will try to live. But it doesn't tell us how to do that. A behavioral covenant is how we can make our theological covenant a reality. As Unitarian Universalists, we are not a creedal faith. There is no list of things one must believe, not even the 7 principles as revered as they are. We are a covenantal faith. We have a sacred promise of how we will treat one another. We are bound by this promise even when we break it. While a covenant is an everyday tool we can use, it is not an everyday document. Covenant, both as a noun and as a verb, is the foundation of our faith, more than the 7 principles, more than the 7 sources. Covenant is more foundational than the church silver, the endowment, or our reputation in the community. The ancient Hebrews would cut a covenant as an agreement between one another and God. This involves sacrificing an animal on the altar, divided, and the 2 parties walking between the 2 halves, sealing their intentions in blood. A covenant can be understood from that point on as a solemn ritual, a mutual promise between a people, one another, and their God regarding matters of life and death. Now that may seem very lofty, and that we are so far from those particular religious practices. But in discussing how we will treat one another and the promises we make no mistake, as we figure that out with our highest beliefs, it is a matter of the life or death of this congregation. The Good Relations Committee has developed a 3-part workshop series I urge you wholeheartedly to attend. Registration ends tomorrow. Please check your email and register today. After these 3 workshops, the GRC will use the material developed by you, the participants, our members and friends, to draft a behavioral covenant. Then you can attend cottage meetings to provide feedback on that first draft. All congregants are invited then to submit written comments to be incorporated into the next draft. In the spring, our members will call a special meeting of the congregation for you to vote to adopt the behavioral covenant that you have created. We get to practice our skills and work toward building the nation we want to see right here in the sphere of our own world, in the realm of our own power, our own behavior, and the walls of this church. Our smallest spheres of life parallel the largest spheres of society. How we speak and treat one another matters, whether that is across the pew, across Hull Chapel, across the political aisle, or from the highest office in the land. Hours after the mayhem and violence, the Capitol was secured. Our lawmakers returned to session, determined to complete the job entrusted to them by the Constitution. They counted the electoral votes and confirmed Biden and Harris's election. And the cleanup began. Masons, plumbers, and tradespeople came to rebuild. Even before the fences were erected, blood still on Zachary Taylor's bust. The architect of the Capitol dispatched Mr. Castleman to the grounds. Mr. Castleman and his colleague drove a bobcat in a dump truck. He took the wooden gallows and noose and crushed it into the back of that dump truck, rendering it into splintered wooden planks. May it not leave our minds, but may we also take solace. It is gone from the grounds, and we are not rebuilding alone. There is no one to bend the arc of history toward justice but ordinary people. Our elected lawmakers, they are ordinary people too. Reporters holding up truth for public scrutiny. Black Lives Matter's leaders. Teachers in school who stopped their lessons to point to their students the reality of what was happening right before their eyes. The first responders, the custodial crew sweeping up broken glass. It's Mr. Castleman and countless others. And it's you and it's me. And we start in our hearts, and then in our home, our neighborhood, our congregation, our city, the nation's house, and our world. May it be so.